Do you believe there's work for Congress to do, or even the president to do, to ensure that we can keep that supply chain more secure and to make sure that our costs are still as low as possible? Do you see any kind of policy work to be done on that level?
Yeah, there's a whole lot of education that needs to go on in the pharmaceutical arena, because there's always a boogeyman, right? There's always somebody that's making these medications cost too doggone much. And big pharma is usually the fall guy, and that's all right. Sometimes they ought to be the fall guy. But the real challenge that we have in terms of pricing for medications in this country is that we here in the United States, by and large, pay for the research and development for pharmaceuticals for the entire world. Pharmaceutical companies have done extremely well in their innovative aspects, the kinds of things that they're bringing to the market right now, the precision medicine, the individualized medicine. This is incredibly exciting stuff. And much of it will be able to mitigate suffering or decrease diseases or even cure diseases that we thought never would be possible to be cured. That innovation is possible because of the reward that those pharmaceutical companies get for their investment. So they get a return on that investment. Now, why is it that we pay for more of it here in the United States than elsewhere? I would suggest it's because of a trade practice that we have, not necessarily a medical or a health practice that we have. So when a big pharmaceutical company here in the United States wants to sell one of its medications to another country, to citizens in another country, they go to that country and they say, we'd like to sell this little purple pill because it cures XYZ. And that country, even developed countries, even very advanced developed countries, many of those countries will say, you're welcome to sell it here, but you can't charge more than X. You can't charge more than this price. And that price rarely covers any of the costs of the research and development. So that makes it so that we here in the United States shoulder even more of the burden. So our trade representative ought to be able to say to that country, we're not going to allow our pharmaceutical companies to sell that medication to you unless you cover the part of the cost of that research and development. That makes it so that their drug costs are a little more expensive in those developed countries, lowers the cost for medications here in the United States, spreads the burden for the research and development for these innovative drugs that are so incredibly important. In terms of supply chain, we've got to make certain that we have individuals from the FDA and from United States Health Services companies be able to have their fingerprints on every aspect of the supply chain. So if it's made here in the United States, that's wonderful. However, if it's made elsewhere, we need to make certain that we know that those products that are being used in that supply chain are of the highest quality, and that the drug is what you buy, what you purchase, what you take is what it says it is, and it is in the concentration that it's needed to be able to cure the disease or the illness or the symptoms that you have.
Amazing. So it seems that there's such an intersection here between even having better trade policy, and it all kind of intersects. And it's amazing how you can't just kind of segregate the issue into one kind of discrete thing, but it really intersects into a lot of different practices that our country has to have going forward. And
it really does. And so often we don't look for that root cause.
Right.
We don't do the root cause analysis. We don't look for that main central problem. And you, in your history, the work that you've done, you know that unless you solve that root cause, unless you address that issue, you're never going to get to the right solution.
That's right. That's right. And I want to talk. So for those at home, should we expect these drug shortages to continue? Is this something that you think that just kind of was kind of exacerbated by COVID and everything, or is this something? What do you kind of see as what's going to be the future, with this particular issue?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised in certain areas. Some of the raw product, the natural product, there are some decreases in supplies that you've got out there. And so whenever you have that kind of challenge in the supply chain, then you're going to have difficulties in getting the end product. But again, we can do a lot more to ensure that it's safe, ensure that those supplies, that supply chain is going to be well served, and make certain that we're able to provide the medications for our fellow citizens.
Absolutely. And then kind of finally, when we think about national security, and obviously a big part of that is making sure that our population has the, the medications that we need. Do you think there's ways that maybe we should kind of open up the conversation more, that we have healthcare experts talking about prescription drugs with the same folks talking about our deeper national security concerns? I mean, how do we kind of nest those two issues together?
Yeah, when I was in Congress and then at HHS, I always thought it was important to have interdepartmental communication. So different areas of the government, the Defense Department, State Department, Commerce Department, all of those areas also have to communicate with each other, but also with the HHS. So when we set a policy in place, when we want to make certain that this supply chain works, that we're able to get those pharmaceuticals, it's not just one individual that's in charge of that. It's an entire executive level government that is running these programs and running these systems. And unless they're communicating with each other, which oftentimes they aren't, you'd think that they would be, but oftentimes they aren't, unless they're communicating with each other, then we're destined to have more problems.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing on that. And I kind of want to shift gears a little bit to talk about the World Health Organization, kind of what's going on at the international level. Recently, the World Health Assembly agreed in December 2021 to negotiate an international agreement aimed at coordinating pandemic responses. And the WHO is aiming for a treaty by May 2024. That's their kind of goal date to roll this out. But under the draft treaty, the United States would be obligated to hand over 20% of its medical supplies, including diagnostic tests, antiviral medications, and vaccines, to the WHO for global distribution. And Article 10 of the draft treaty even specifies this to be done in real time. I mean, even before American needs are met. So what is your take on these types of treaties, and how doesn't this somewhat undermine American health security?
Yeah, this is an incredibly important topic, and again, folks kind of assume that there's a system in place that allows for the smooth progress of whatever's necessary from a medication standpoint or a health standpoint, especially for those in the developed world. I had the privilege of serving as the 23rd Health and Human Services Secretary. In that role, I had the opportunity to participate in the first G20 Health Summit that had ever occurred in 2017. This is the top 20 nations, and from a developed standpoint in the world, getting together and sharing information about what it is that their health system, where they can help each other, where the voids are, where the communication needs to be when a major challenge worldwide happens. And I was stunned that the first time that those countries had gotten together to talk about specifically about health, and the health secretaries get together and those in charge with these challenges, that it was the first time that it ever occurred. So I think there can be a whole lot more work to be done to make certain that kind of communication occurs. However, the first role of the United States government is to make certain that its citizens are cared for from a health standpoint. So seeding any information, seeding any knowledge, seeding any supply that we in the United States have to other nations prior to taking care of our own population just doesn't make any sense. Now, that being said, it's imperative that we work with all the countries on Earth, because these bugs that go around, they don't know any borders at all. And so we've got to make certain that we work closely with other countries in the world and develop those relationships so that we know that there's a trusting communication and truthful information that's being shared. Right now, I would suggest that we've got huge problems with China and the lack of transparency and the lack of information that China is willing to provide, not just to the United States, but to the world. And the World Health Organization, again, I had the opportunity and privilege of attending one of the World Health Assemblies where the nations of the world get together and discuss what needs to be done on so many different topics. But China hasn't been transparent, and the World Health Organization hasn't been holding their feet to the fire in a way that's absolutely necessary and vital. And so that communication, that process absolutely needs to be put in place, and it hasn't, to my understanding, and from my perspective, hasn't been done in the way that it needs to be in order to make certain that the American people are protected.